Either it works or it doesn't. That's the story about evolution. Welcome to Revolution Against Evolution. I'm your host, Doug Sharp.
And your co-host, Rich Gear, here as well.
We are going to talk a little bit about what I think is one of the main arguments against evolution, is that it's sort of an instantaneous on-off switch. Either you have life or you don't have life. That's one aspect of it. Or either you have a creature feature and you don't have that creature feature. And either it works or it doesn't. And so that's what I'm going to talk about. But I'm going to start off a little bit about what atheists have a problem with, and that's usually it's the problem of evil, and they don't understand why it's sort of a stumbling block for them. And so you have to ask the question, well, why is it a stumbling block for them? Because maybe they don't like this doctrine, that evil exists because there is sin in this world, but it's consistent with what the Bible says.
But Doug, before you even get there, the problem comes in is how do they even define evil if there is no God?
Right.
My point of it is evil is totally subjective from one person to the next. Yeah, you might have a consensus in a culture or a society, but overall, you've had societies that do great things that we could consider evil. Look at it even today, how they try to redefine past, even America, past American experience or world or viewpoints with today's lens. And I go, where do you come up with this stuff if you don't believe in an outside arbiter of what is good and what is evil? So that begs the question, Doug. I mean, what the problem of evil to me is greater for them. How do they even come up with the idea that there is such a thing as evil?
Well, they will say that the evil is a consensus of what the majority opinion is.
But the majority changes.
That's right, and so
it has over the centuries.
It was during World War II. You had evil in Germany, but the Germans thought they were good. They thought they were on God's side, and so
because he brought him out of a horrible depression. Hitler did, it was a terrible. Our depression looked like a Sunday school picnic, as I understand it. It was a terrible thing that they went through post World War I. And Hitler got him out of that, and they felt pretty good about themselves. But yeah, everything we judge now, even things like that, many atheists like Planned Parenthood and eugenics and all that stuff, which was considered a good thing back in the 19 teens and 20s and 30s, and even up until after the end of World War II, they still thought it was a good thing. Then it became so obviously wrong. They had to change their name from eugenics to Planned Parenthood. But I'm saying my point of it is that its consensus changes. So the problem of evil, but let's just give it to them. We recognize, because obviously what they're doing, Doug, is using our definitions to try to hamstring us. What I'm trying to expose to them is you have no hamstring to pull because you don't even have an evil. There's nothing, just because what you say is evil, somebody else could say it's not evil. You have no real arbiter of good and evil if there is no God. So again, Doug, back to your premise, unless everything works, nothing works. The idea if there is no God, which makes everything work, you have no basis for rationality whatsoever.
Well, what I'm saying is that they don't listen to this argument because of they're stumbling over that very, very first thing, the problem of evil.
Yeah.
But anyway, then they say, well, God, if he were a good God, he would do this.
No. Well, Doug, I mean, even as a Christian, as a person who's a believer in an all-powerful God, it does. You say, God, how did Satan come to be? You really get esoteric, but how does things like that happen? I don't really fully understand it, but it's there. It's consistent, and everything that we see lines up with those facts, with those salient facts. Really, it lets you understand this is why the world is the way it is. Because, Doug, the problem of evil is the idea that there is a nature that was created perfect and it fell, and now evil comes into existence. If you don't have that premise, you have no basis for evil or good. And if you have basic long ages, like evolutionary doctrine has, then even if you're a Christian, you have basically a real problem with that God is either impotent or he's a liar or he's evil himself.
Right.
And so they reject God out of hand because God being evil, well, that's a non-starter. So you got to say, well, how does this happen? But
we'll answer those questions in another show, and we've talked about it before. So go back and search our other shows on our YouTube channel and find the one that talks about this specifically. But we wanted to start out with that because we know that that's going to be the first part of it. But then you have to have a logical definition of evolution and a logical presentation of evolution.
Yeah, now we're getting more into the nuts and bolts issues, really kind of down to the brass tacks, the nitty gritty. Yep. All right, go for it.
That was what convinced me back years ago, is that I could not see a mechanism for the synthesis of life. And it's because either it's dead or it's alive. You have one or the other, and so it's an instantaneous thing. You either have life occurring or it's still dead. And so therefore, you, Mr. Evolutionist, have a scenario where you can experimentally create the conditions for life. You have no excuse if you can't create life in the test tube and define the conditions on Earth where it was probably possible to do so. And so a lot of things are like that in the whole
panoply. Is that the word you're trying to look at?
Panoply, yes. But you can't hide behind millions of years, and it's because millions of years don't help this problem, because either life is there, it works, or it doesn't.
Yeah.
Life is dead. Then if you add millions of years, well, whatever you created in life then becomes dead.
Yeah, and the thing is, Doug, we talked about this, the scenarios they propose to create life out of a test tube or whatever, the primordial world. None of those things really serve to create life. They just don't do it. Okay. None of them are effective. They can't figure out, they can't duplicate it. And consequently, you're left with the idea that an inorganic, non-organic piece of material suddenly at some point spontaneously generated into life, which is the denial of all evidentiary science. In other words, everything tells you that life always comes from life. The law of biogenesis says that non-life can never produce life. That's a law. That's not a theory like evolution is. I know they'll chew me out and say, well, that theory is so well proven. It's really, well, then it would be a law, like the law of gravity, the law of biogenesis, the law of thermodynamics. These are laws, okay? And because everything in observational science tells us these are what they are, but you've never seen anything be able to combine in some self-replicating molecule to become going from a non-living something, whatever it is, into a living something, whatever it is. Right. It's never been observed. And so this is a denial of one of the most basic principles of science, in my estimation.
Now, what I found really interesting just recently is that there was a world that they found out in outer space, which gave a spectrum of a hydrogen sulfide type of molecule. I don't remember what it exactly was, but they said that particular molecule that you're finding on this planet, a number of light years away, but it's one of the closer in planets that they've been able to discover.
Okay.
Extrasolar planets. It has this spectrum that shows hydrogen sulfide, and it's only produced by life, or so they claim. So that's their evidence, is that they're finding water on these worlds,
Right.
finding all these, some methane. So methane is something that they think is going to be causing life. All these simple molecules that you would find as part of what you get with the decaying gases here on the Earth, And so their scenario for creation of life starts with hydrogen, ammonia, methane, and a few of these others, water, and a few of these other things. And so they are hoping to find a scenario where some energy is put into these and you can create these building blocks of life. Now, you can synthesize some of these in your laboratory, but when you get them, they're not necessarily in the form that you want them. And so they have to be actually molded into a shape that actually works. An example is the amino acids, which come in two different forms. You have a right-handed form and you have a left-handed form.
Right.
Mirror images of each other. And the life only uses the left-hand kind. So they have to come up with a theory that explains this. They haven't been able to do that. And so, and the problem is that if you have equal mixtures of both, you're going to get equal mixtures of both in the protein that you put together.
Do they know why a right-handed molecule can't be a living thing, or is it just always that's sort of like an axiom? It just that's the way it is. I mean,
they've tried experiments where they've actually tried making some polypeptides with that. The first life, they found out that trying to explain proteins wasn't going to cut it, and so they've been coming up with a RNA world. So,
yeah, I've heard something. I don't know much about it, but
all right, this is something they proposed back in the late 60s or 70s,
okay,
like that, and
it's not really anything new.
you got to start with RNA, which would and then you would have and the problem is that you have to have a messenger RNA and a ribosomal RNA to produce the proteins, because and then you might have something that a mechanism that would create the proteins, and then you have to have the proteins to create the DNA, and the DNA would then produce the RNA. And so you have this scenario where you have the chicken and egg problem, but
Yeah, which comes first, the RNA or the DNA?
they thought maybe if you had the RNA first, you'd be able to start life up. Well, it really isn't that decent of a thing. Now, one of the things that I worry about a little bit, and go back to our little scenario with COVID vaccines.
Oh yeah,
Because what they ended up doing with that is that they created a RNA, the messenger RNA, that mimics the COVID spike. Well, my fear, and I think I may be a victim of this, is that this messenger RNA got incorporated into our DNA, and it's producing that particular COVID spike. And so we have long COVID based upon that problem ingesting that messenger RNA that creates this stuff.
oh boy.
So I'm a little bit skeptical of those vaccines now, even though I've had 4 of them. And we had one of our creationist friends talk us into saying that was a decent idea. Well, I'm not so sure now.
I'm going to change your mind a little bit, because we talked about this years ago when it was coming, well, back in 2020, 21, whatever it was. And we thought it seemed to be fairly benign as far as what it was, but
yeah, well,
you're having second thoughts, because I've had 3.
I'm having second coughs is a problem.
Second coughs?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So it's a something I worry about. So I think there's all this hopeful stuff that's going on with the scientists sending probes out into outer space to search for life on other planets, to show that evolution happened here. It's sort of trying to create some sort of purpose for us, why we're here, what we're doing, and what the whole thing is. And it gives also a mechanism for somebody to explain why they behave the way they do.
Yeah, it always reminds me of the old story about you got these scientists and they're doing all these wonderful experiments and they're trying to climb this huge, astronomical, obstacle. They're trying to get out farther and farther and farther. They finally get where they get the end of the universe. They meet the theologians that are already there.
Yeah.
So
now, the thing that's interesting to me is that I earned my living as a programmer. I took a lot of chemistry in college and high school, but my career was in programming. And so I view the whole DNA, RNA, protein process as being a computer program. Because I see that sort of thing happening. It's actually a digital world that's happening in our bodies that's producing all this. It's like a 3D printer that's going on, making stuff to make life and make it work. And it's actually a four-dimensional.
because it anticipates, right? Is that what you're getting at?
Yes, it anticipates what is needed in the body, and it changes the code on the fly to create something that is needed in the body. Evolutionists have to explain this, and they can't explain it, that they always have millions of years to work with, because in an instant you either create the life, and then another instant it's dead.
Yeah, goes back to your first point there, second point, yeah.
So that's a point with that. One of the things that is very interesting is that there's a molecule called ATP, adenosine triphosphate, and it's really the energy workings of the cell, and it's actually a motor. It's interesting if you can look up on the internet what the ATP motor looks like and how it works, and how it creates all the energy in your cell and transfers that energy to the working parts of the cell. And so that's the interesting thing, is once you have proteins, once you have DNA, once you have the RNA, you have to have it all working within the mechanism of the cell. And either works or it's dead.
Or it doesn't, yep.
And so that's the problem that they have to work with. Where did the cell wall come from? The cell wall, you have to have something to contain it. That in itself is a whole different process. Lipids are fats, and either you have them in the cis form, which is the higher energy form, or the trans form, which is a lower energy form. And life only uses the cis form, and so lipids was what makes up the cell wall. A lot of the components in your cell is made up of lipids, and they are three-dimensionally differentiated in the cell. Then you have the prokaryotes, which is the simpler cell, which is just a mass of jelly. It has all these components of life in it. And then there are prokaryotes, which is they have a nucleus. And so this is another big gap. Either you have a nucleus that runs your cell, or you have this other mechanism that's totally different in the simpler cells. Now, they both have functions in life. The bacterium actually do a job in your gut, and so they help break down food and do a lot of jobs in life. And so they have these single cell organisms have a mechanism. But there's another gap that goes from single-celled to multi-celled organisms.
Yeah.
And so the gap is that you have to now start differentiating what goes on in these cells. It's going to start from one single cell where it does everything to splitting off those jobs into several different cells. And so one cell does one job, another cell does another job, and you have multicellular organisms that are much more complicated in their mechanism.
This is some of the thing when they talk about like embryonic and adult stem cells, like stem cells, they differentiate, they go into different parts. Yeah. So that's I mean,
an amazing
it's a
process.
fascinating thing.
Now, evolutionists don't have an explanation for these. And so that sort of leaves them out in the lurch and that certain things. So either it works or it doesn't. Either it's there or it isn't there. It can't be half there or partially there. It either is totally complex, or it breaks down into those little components and dies and disintegrates. And so the difference is that whole energy that holds it all together. Now, I did want to do a little sidebar here.
Okay.
We've got plants, which uses chlorophyll. Then we also have hemoglobin, which uses which is in animals or creatures. And hemoglobin and chlorophyll are quite similar in their chemical structure. The chlorophyll has a magnesium, and it's a center metal. It's in the center of this massive porphyrins. And then there's some massive porphyrins that in hemoglobin that has iron at its center. And so it's kind of a interesting thing that there's a different design in plants and animals. One of them, the chlorophyll, fixes carbon dioxide and for use in the plant, whereas hemoglobin, it fixes oxygen and to carry it to various parts of the body.
Well, it's interesting because you think about that. Plants give off oxygen as a byproduct, and we give out carbon dioxide.
Right.
And plants need carbon dioxide, but we need oxygen. So it's kind of almost a symbiosis there in a way that I believe God set it up that way to do that. The other thing part of it is the plants are biologically alive, but they're not biblically alive.
Yeah.
And I don't know, we don't want to get maybe into the weeds on that, but there's a difference there. And when you're explaining the differences between plant and animal cells, it's quite amazing, especially when you see how similar the chlorophyll to the hemoglobin. They're chemically, say, very similar, but they're so different in what they produce and what they do.
So you have this differentiation and specialization in cells, and one of them is the origin of sexual reproduction, and that's kind of an interesting thing too. Where did that start, and where did it come about? It had to come about instantaneously. Either it worked or it didn't. You don't have it halfway. You don't have it halfway. Either, of course, the asexual reproduction happens only in bacteria or microorganisms.
We've talked about this, I think, over the years. Sexual reproduction makes no sense from an efficiency standpoint. Asexual reproduction is much more efficient, you'd think, right? But
like something like the metamorphosis of the butterfly, where you have the caterpillar, the cocoon, and then you have the butterfly and the egg, and you have all these different forms of life that is over its life cycle.
The butterfly is always fascinating to me because it goes in from the caterpillar into the chrysalis, and it comes on a butterfly. It's like it's sort of almost a physical symbol, a type, if you will, of the resurrection of the dead that's going to happen for us. We're right now we're in our caterpillar phase,
Right.
and but then in the resurrection of the dead, we will be in our butterfly stage, and we'd be, it's like glorified and a much greater thing. And it's like when you think of a butterfly, it's hard to realize that it's still an insect, and we will still be a creature. We're not the creator, but we will be glorified in a neat way. It kind of has a symbol, a simple symbol to really kind of show what the promise is really going to happen. We are going to be changed. But
Right.
in the meantime, we have, even in this physical life, so many complicated, amazingly different things that, like you say, unless everything works, nothing works. And so you get, we talked about this before. We talked again on shows over the years. You'll talk about irreducible complexity, but we also talked about specified complexity. There are things that are so complex, but unless everything works, nothing works. But it's not only that, but you can't even propose a scenario for many of these things to be adapted to suddenly become useful for something else. There's certain components that are only good for this or only good for that, and it's quite amazing and spectacularly complicated. Even at the same time, in some respects, it's fairly straightforward and simple. You got what, 4 DNA molecules, 4 connectors? What are they? C, T, G, and A, or whatever it is, or the whatever it is, and it's just 4 of them. And the sugars are
all the combinations of them that make it work.
That's the neat thing, the combination.
Now we just have a couple of minutes. We have origin of food. Just create a pill and plant it in the ground and have it come up. You chemists should be able to figure that out. And then the origin of teeth. Okay, extracts of calcium, from all your surrounding things, and have these little rocks end up in your mouth. Okay, in the right spot. So what I'm saying is that you need to apply this principle, either it works or it doesn't, to creature features. You can, say the origin of the duckbill platypus, for example, with the poison fang on his heel spur, or you have webbed feet in front, claws in back, duckbill, and the furry back, and you have all these different features that you have to explain why it's an egg-laying mammal. I am afraid that evolutionists don't have a good explanation for any of this.
No.
We'll see you next time on Revolution Against Evolution.